We're going to take you to another live now where the United Nations is currently commemorating International Nelson Mandela Day. Let's take you live to New York now.
275 of 6 June 2014 and 69/269 of 2nd April 2015, the Assembly established the United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize as an honorary award to be presented once every 5 years as a tribute to recognize the outstanding achievements of 2 individuals, 1 female and 1 male, who have dedicated their lives to the service of humanity by promoting the purposes and principles of the United Nations while honoring and paying homage to Nelson Mandela's extraordinary legacy of reconciliation, political transition, and social transformation. Excellencies, distinguished laureates, ladies and gentlemen, today we celebrate one of the towering figures of our time, Nelson Mandela. We honor his courage, his leadership in the struggle for freedom, and his lifelong commitment to unity across Africa. Madiba embodied the values of peace, equality, human rights, and service to others. He reminded us that freedom is meaningless without justice, that justice is the bedrock of peace, that peace depends on institutions that protect the rights and dignity of all people, and that these fundamental freedoms must never be compromised. In a world still divided by conflict and inequalities, Mandela's legacy urges us to still choose dialogue over hatred, understanding over fear and vengeance, and unity above all. Indeed, it is still in our hands to combat inequality and poverty, as this year's theme reminds us. This duty does not rest with any single leader or nation. It belongs to us all, belongs to all peoples, belongs to all nations. Dear friends, today's commemoration holds special significance, for we also host the award ceremony for the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize. This is the 3rd edition of this prestigious award. It is conferred every 5 years to those who have dedicated their lives to the service of humanity and advancing the purposes and principles of the United Nations. It is my honor to welcome and congratulate this year's distinguished laureates. First, Ms. Brenda Reynolds of Canada is a social worker who brings a lifetime of lived experience, advocacy, and leadership to the forefront of indigenous peoples' health, mental wellness, and reconciliation efforts both in Canada and internationally. Second, Mr. Kennedy Odede of Kenya is an advocate of social entrepreneurship and community development. He is the founder and chief executive officer of Shining Hope for Communities, which empowers local communities and delivers vital services to over 2.4 million people each year. The selection of these remarkable leaders sends a powerful message that grassroots leadership places the power in our hands to create change, that each of us can make a difference. In this regard, I express my sincere appreciation to the selection committee comprised of the permanent representatives of Bahrain, Egypt, Finland, Poland, St. Kitts and Nevis, and South Africa as an ex officio member for their time, energy, and tireless engagement. I am also grateful to the eminent personalities who, in their advisory capacity, offered wisdom, invaluable advice, and insights that are pivotal in identifying laureates who reflect Mandela's spirit. Her Excellency Ms. Marcella Liebert, Governor General of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, Her Excellency Ms. Tarja Halonen, former President of the Republic of Finland, His Excellency Dr. Mohamed Mustafa El-Baradei, Nobel laureate, former Vice President of Egypt, and former Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and Ms. Elżbieta Mikos-Kuza, Senior Lecturer at the Faculty of Law, University of Warsaw, Poland. My sincere thanks also go to the Department of Global Communications and Under Secretary General Melissa Fleming for their extraordinary support. Excellencies, this year also marks the 10th anniversary of the Nelson Mandela Rules, the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the treatment of prisoners, on which I convened a high-level debate last month. These rules are a testament to yet another aspect of Nelson Mandela's legacy, justice, and dignity for all everywhere. It is a legacy born from 27 years spent behind prison bars, where Mandela held firm to the belief that freedom, dignity, and equality were not just a dream for the few, but a destiny for all. Excellencies, this dream now rests in our hands. Nelson Mandela's life was a call to action, one that rings across generations today. As we mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, let us draw strength from his courage. Let us realize the promise of the United Nations Charter. Let us reaffirm faith in human rights, in the dignity and worth of human person, in equality between men and women. And let us establish conditions that ensure justice and respect for the obligations arising from the law. Our abiding aim must be to strengthen multilateralism so that tomorrow's leaders who will write its next chapters pick up a mantle of courage, compassion, and hope. What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, as Madiba once said. It is what difference we have made to the lives of others that will determine the significance of the life we lead. Let us forge ahead and make a difference. Thank you. Thank you. I now give the floor to His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations.
Mr. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, Mandela Prize winners Ms. Brenda Reynolds, Mr. Kennedy Odette, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we celebrate the life and legacy of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. Madiba's extraordinary life was a triumph of the human spirit. He endured the brutal weight of oppression and emerged not with a vision of vengeance and division, but of reconciliation, peace, and unity. Today, Madiba's legacy is now our responsibility. We must carry forward this commitment to peace, justice, and human dignity. One of the central lessons of Mandela's life was that power is not a personal possession to be hoarded. Power is about lifting others up. It's about what we can achieve with one another and for one another. Power is about people. In every facet of his life, Nelson Mandela demonstrated the power of collective grassroots action to drive change and progress and deliver power to the powerless. This same spirit can be found in today's winners of the Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela Prize. Ms. Brenda Reynolds is a Salto member from Fishing Lake First Nation in Canada. She's a social worker who turned the struggle against the most hideous of crimes against children into a national force for change, supporting and developing trauma responses for survivors and families of the residential school system. Mr. Kennedy Odede grew up in the Kibera slum in Kenya. A long-time community activist, the organization he founded unites community groups from across the country and now reaches more than 2.4 million people each year with essential services, everything from education to water. Both prize winners embody Nelson Mandela's words, which are engraved on their prizes, and I quote, "What counts in life is not the mere fact that we have lived, it is what difference we have made to the lives of others." End of quote. On behalf of the United Nations, I congratulate Ms. Reynolds and Mr. Odede on this well-deserved recognition. Excellences, alors que l'Organisation des Nations Unies célèbre ses 80 ans, l'héritage de réconciliation et de transformation transmis par Nelson Mandela continue de nous inspirer et de nous motiver. Partout dans le monde, les droits humains et la dignité sont menacés, non seulement par les conflits et l'instabilité, mais aussi par les inégalités systématiques, l'exclusion, les catastrophes climatiques et le recul des libertés chèrement acquises. Le moment est venu de renouveler notre engagement collectif envers les principes qu'incarne notre organisation et qui ont défini la vie exceptionnelle de Nelson Mandela. La liberté, la justice, l'égalité des droits, la solidarité, la réconciliation, la paix. Aujourd'hui et chaque jour, poursuivons le chemin tracé par la vie de Nelson Mandela, une vie au service des autres et du progrès. Je vous remercie.
I thank the Secretary General. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Grace Naledi Mandisa Pandor, Chair of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, to deliver a keynote statement.
Your Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Excellency Secretary General, permanent representatives, invited guests. I wish to begin by thanking you all for being here. I'm grateful for the opportunity to address you all this morning. The Nelson Mandela Foundation expresses profound thanks to this body for allowing us this unique opportunity to address you on Nelson Mandela International Day. President Mandela had an enduring appreciation for the bold role the United Nations played in advancing South Africa's liberation struggle. The UN steered us to freedom, stood against apartheid domination, not through arms, but through bringing its undeniable moral weight into combat against injustice. That boldness, that courage is needed more and more today. And we hope as we remember and honor President Mandela, we recall his words, "It is in your hands." So what do we as the Foundation call on all of us to do today? On this day, Nelson Mandela International Day, our call to all of you is to remember to make good trouble. This call is inspired by the man himself. While we all refer to President Mandela by his first name, his given first name, Nelson, the name that he was actually given at birth was Rolihlahla. In isiXhosa, which was Mandela's mother tongue, and which is one of the main languages of our country, South Africa, the colloquial meaning of Rolihlahla is troublemaker. In true isiXhosa, it is shake the tree. Mandela was a troublemaker, the kind of good troublemaker that we need more of in the world today, and the kind that we will continue to need well into the future. The kind of troublemaker that some people did not always love because he pushed for an equality that we all should enjoy and for the overcoming of a system of oppression which was convenient and profitable to some. A system of oppression that was defeated in South Africa eventually, but which has yet to be eradicated globally. The foundation, which I now chair, often gets asked what Mandela would say or do on certain issues if he were alive today. We often ask this question of ourselves. In the context of my call here today, the question does arise: what kind of world would he be prepared to make good trouble for? Drawing on his life and work and his many personal reflections, we believe that it would be a just world, a world where justice does not kneel to the rich and powerful, where our collective upliftment takes precedence over individual privilege, where the benefits and burdens of our society are equally shared, where our privilege and personal biases do not sway us from being just, and where our like or dislike of someone does not hinder us from doing what is right in relation to them. President Mandela was a fierce man on matters of justice, but I don't recall one occasion where he was disrespectful or rude to another person. So this world where justice is respected and upheld is the kind of world that we are asking you to make good trouble for. Now, some may ask, as you sit here, that I'm an accountant, I am just a teacher, I am just a manager. What does making good trouble look like for me? While it can take on individual manifestations, let me suggest how we can bring it to life and give expression to it in our everyday lives. Firstly, making good trouble means being really excellent at what you do. You should have the knowledge that doing very well on your responsibilities contributes toward collective upliftment, regardless of whether people are watching or not, and regardless of the magnitude of the action. What we refer to sometimes as the ordinary has its own significance, and when done to the best of one's ability, this can make a positive impact on the lives of others and contribute toward better processes, systems, and institutional functioning. Second, making good trouble means always asking oneself the question as you go through life, how do I make change in the space that I'm in? Because it's incredible that we can be in significant spaces and achieve absolutely nothing. So how do I use my space to make a difference? And showing up to what that question reveals. These are the things that Nelson Mandela did. He aimed to be excellent in the things that he did, and he showed up to the question of how he could make change in the space that he was in with his whole self and not just a part of himself. The two awardees of this year's United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize, Brenda Reynolds and Kennedy Odede, offer us further examples of people who are energetic in their pursuit of good trouble. Last night, we launched a really important exhibition for us right here at the UN. The exhibition is entitled Our Shared Humanity in Action. It focuses on the important role that the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid played in combating apartheid in South Africa. The committee was established by your body, the UN General Assembly, in 1962, and its work over the decades of its existence demonstrates what can be done when people come together to make good trouble for global equity. The committee demonstrated what can be done when diplomats come together, rise to the occasion, and dedicate themselves to the upliftment of people in need, out of the recognition that while they may not be their fellow national citizens, they are their fellow human beings. What brought freedom to South Africa was good trouble. And while making good trouble for global equity requires many things at this current juncture in our geopolitical domain, one of the things that is needed now is for us to contribute to building a stronger, reformed, and capable United Nations. As the foundation, we believe the UN must remain the premier multilateral body of our globe, and that we should support it to execute its very significant mandate. We need to democratize its structures. We need to have it more efficient. We need the Security Council to do the job it was established for, but we must maintain the UN. This must happen for the sake of the global community, and we must have change for the credibility of this organization. So as we celebrate 80 years of the UN, let us think about and build better for the next 80 years. When President Mandela came to the United Nations for the first time, he said that while the UN was in session, people would come up to him and shake hands with him, and that he could not bring himself, due to his good manners, to shake hands with people while seated. So he would instinctively get up as ambassadors approached him and shake hands with them. This, however, was not to the liking of his delegation, who told him, "Mr. President, you are disturbing the conference." And they asked him to leave and go back to his hotel, which, being Mandela, he did. I'm also reminded of the kind of heaviness with which he first came to the UN, given the challenges of South Africa's transition to democracy and the legacy he inherited. One can imagine, as he was negotiating, the weight on his shoulders as he spoke to colleagues in this chamber, but also the kind of reprieve he might have felt in the presence of so many country representatives committed to international solidarity and to support for a free South Africa. So let us too feel a reprieve in the company of all of us gathered here today. But let us leave here reminded of the work that each of us is called to contribute to. I trust that the memory of Nelson Mandela will keep inspiring all of us to do the work of transformation and to never give up on his dream of a just society and a just world. I will end my contribution this morning in the same way that President Mandela concluded his speech in 1990 when he addressed that special committee against apartheid in this very room. He said, "We also take this opportunity to extend warm greetings to all others who fight for their liberation and for their human rights, including the peoples of Palestine and Western Sahara. We commend their struggles to you, convinced that we are all moved by the fact that freedom is indivisible, convinced that the denial of the rights of one diminishes the freedom of others." I thank you once again for allowing me the opportunity to address you, particularly you, Mr. President and Secretary General. I wish all of you leave this room determined to make good trouble. Thank you very much.
I thank the chair of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. We will now proceed to the Nelson Mandela Prize Award ceremony for our two laureates. It is my honor to present Mrs. Brenda Reynolds, Indigenous social worker from Canada. Ms. Reynolds is supported today by a proud community of Indigenous women and girls, men and boys. We warmly welcome to the General Assembly's Hall today the daughters of tradition and the sons of tradition visiting from the state of Wisconsin in the United States. Their presence here underscores the vital importance of preserving indigenous cultures and traditions with our global community. It also serves as a reminder that the work we honor in our laureates today has a profound impact on the lives of indigenous people. I invite Mrs. Brenda Reynolds to the stage to receive the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize presented by the Secretary General of the United Nations. We will now hear a statement by Mrs. Brenda Reynolds, the 2025 United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize laureate. Mrs. Reynolds, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency and Mr. Secretary General, honored members of the United Nations, esteemed delegates, including the Daughters of Tradition and Sons of Tradition. Thank you for joining us today, and my family members who have traveled here with me, and friends, and others who are watching at home and in their workplaces. Miigwech. I wish to respectfully acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional homeland of the Lenape people. Sorry if I mispronounced that. When I first found out that I was one of the two laureates for this year's Nelson Mandela Awards, I was speechless and couldn't believe that I was selected. And even though I speak 2 languages, I still cannot find the words to express the depth of my gratitude and the humility I have to accept the United Nations Nelson Mandela Prize. And happy birthday to him in the heavens today, because now he is one of our ancestors. To receive a prize that holds the name of an iconic man who embodied peaceful resistance and reconciliation is a tremendous honor and a solemn responsibility. I am moved by the recognition by the United Nations, which continues to uphold the ideals of justice, peace, and human dignity. I am a Saulteaux woman from Fishing Lake First Nation, a reserve in Canada, who shared similar parallels to Nelson Mandela's experiences with our government's efforts to civilize and change who we are as Indigenous people to our homelands. And there are many parallels to what we had experienced in both our countries, where the governments impacted policies to change who we are, to face oppression, to face a violation of human rights in our countries. And it is from that perspective that I have been following and have had an interest in Nelson Mandela since I found out about him. One outstanding example, is when the South African government came to Canada during the 1930s to ask the Canadian government, how do you manage your Indigenous people? The response was, we have them segregated on reserves, where they have to have a pass when they leave the reserves. We also give them status cards to identify who they are. That practice, some of those practices became the model that is known as apartheid in South Africa. A government practice here in Canada, not here, but in Canada, started by the forced removal of Indigenous children in the 1800s. The children were separated from their families, from their communities, and from their cultures, and placed in residential schools for the purpose of civilizing them, and also to eradicate their cultures. While attending the residential schools, the children experienced severe abuse. And one of the things that they were not permitted to do was to speak their language. But some of the abuse included the emotional abuse, where they were made to feel ashamed of who they are as Indigenous people. And I was not a residential school student, but my experience started when I became a counselor at Gordon's Indian Residential School in 1988. At that time in Saskatchewan, Gordon's was the only federally operated residential school. And while I was there, just before the end of the school year, one 13-year-old girl came to me and said she wanted to share with me her experiences of what was happening in the residential school. She was being sexually abused by a senior staff member. At the end of the night, we had 17 girls disclose that they were being sexually abused by the same staff member. And subsequently, I started hearing from other students about their experiences, and some of them were former students at that time, but they had also were talking about their own experiences of sexual abuse. And the person, that senior staff member, he was charged and convicted, and he became the first person of a residential school to be convicted. So these charges were the beginning of other disclosures that came from across Canada, from survivors who were speaking about their sexual abuse experiences. Those charges and disclosures became the largest class action lawsuit to date in Canada. And that lawsuit is known as the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. Under the settlement agreement was a provision to provide emotional support, for Canada to provide emotional support. And I was asked to develop a pilot called the Resolution Health Support Program. And I developed the program that included training Indigenous people from communities and cultural support workers to provide emotional support to survivors, their families, and once the Truth and Reconciliation started in Canada, we provided support to Canadians attending the hearings that we had across Canada. And what I did for 7 years, when I trained the workers on a monthly basis, I trained them to understand what the long-lasting effects of childhood trauma and what those impacts are on their survivors and also intergenerationally. But we have to remember that trauma experienced in genocide is not the trauma that is defined in the Western sense. In the Western sense, trauma is an experience where it's a short, brief experience, and then you return to a normal state. But when you're experiencing genocide, you learn to live with the trauma, and that has severe impacts on you. And so these experiences of abuse and the eradication, the attempt to eradicate the culture, and were some of the experiences that we started to hear in the beginning of the settlement agreement. And we also heard of students going through medical experimentation, and we still continue to hear of cases of forced and coerced sterilization. But when someone is living in a state of trauma, they stay in that elevated state of response, and that becomes normal, because you're with a perpetrator and you're living in a system where you are facing racism and discrimination. And secondly, what I did with the trainer when I was training the workers was that for them to understand the settlement agreement and what the provisions were and what options were for the survivors that they can go through under the settlement agreement. And I did this at a grade 3 education level, because this is what the survivors were saying, is that I went to school for 8 years, but I came out with a grade 3 education. So for them to understand what was available to them, I ensured that the information we provided was at a grade 3 level that they can understand. Furthermore, what I did is I also included Indigenous culture as a part of the healing, the education, and the emotional support.
All right, we're going to come out of those live proceedings there at the award ceremony taking place live at the United Nations General Assembly there. And of course, that was the Nelson Mandela Laureate recipient there, Brenda Reynolds from Canada. And of course, she was just giving her acceptance speech as, of course, one of the people that has been awarded that prize due to her emulating former statements in humanitarian efforts, as well as ensuring peace and security and unity worldwide.